What happens when Hollywood's most fearless action star steps into the lion's den of daytime television, and refuses to play by the rules? Not the rules of politeness. Not the rules of forced laughter. And certainly not the rules of smiling while being quietly dissected on live TV. What you're about to witness is not just an interview. It's a collision. And on this particular morning in New York City, inside the bright, carefully controlled chaos of The View, nobody, not the producers, not the co-hosts, not even the studio audience, had any idea they were about to watch a moment that would feel less like television, and more like detonation. The studio lights were already blazing by 8:45 a.m., washing the set in that artificial sunrise glow designed to feel warm and inviting. The audience shuffled into their seats clutching paper coffee cups, murmuring with the low hum of expectation. Stagehands moved quickly along the perimeter, adjusting cables, whispering into headsets, checking timing cues. Everything felt routine. Manufactured. Safe. Backstage, however, the air was different. It carried tension. A subtle charge. In the makeup room, Joy Behar sat upright in her chair, chin slightly lifted, eyes fixed on her reflection as a stylist dusted powder across her cheekbones. Her lips were pressed thin, not nervous, but sharpened. She wasn't anxious. She was prepared. "He's coming in hot today," she muttered, almost to herself. "Let's see if he can handle real questions." Her voice held that familiar blend of sarcasm and certainty, the tone viewers had come to associate with decades of pointed commentary. She adjusted the collar of her blazer. She knew her audience. She knew her rhythm. And she believed she knew her guest. Across the hallway, in a quieter corner of the studio, Tom Cruise stood alone for a moment, hands loosely folded in front of him. The muffled noise of the audience filtered through the walls like distant surf. He wore a tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. Relaxed. Controlled. But his eyes were alert. Focused. He had done his homework. He had watched clips. Interviews. Patterns. Interruptions. Smirks. Timing. The subtle art of cornering a guest with a question disguised as humor. He knew the game. The difference was, he wasn't planning to play it. A production assistant approached. "We're live in 30 seconds. Tom nodded once. The hallway lights seemed slightly dimmer compared to the blinding stage. He inhaled slowly. Not nerves. Calculation. On the other side of the curtain, the opening theme music swelled through the studio. Applause rose like a rehearsed wave. Cameras glided into position on smooth mechanical tracks. The hosts entered one by one, smiling brightly, waving, settling into their chairs. At the center of it all, Joy leaned back comfortably, fingers resting lightly on her cue cards. This was her terrain. Her battlefield. And joining us today, the announcer's voice boomed warmly, is Hollywood icon Tom Cruise, here to talk about the latest installment of Mission Impossible. The audience erupted. Tom stepped onto the stage with that unmistakable movie star composure, flashing a practiced grin, waving gently before taking his seat. For a brief moment, everything felt exactly as it should. Friendly. Polished. Predictable. Joy turned toward him, lips curling into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So, Tom," she began sweetly, her tone dipped in honey, "another mission, impossible. You're still doing your own stunts?" Tom nodded lightly. "Absolutely." She tilted her head. "At this point, isn't that risky? I mean, you're not exactly 20 anymore." A ripple of nervous laughter floated from the audience. The camera zoomed slightly tighter. Tom smiled. But it wasn't the wide promotional grin people expected. It was smaller. Measured. "Well, Joy," he replied calmly, "I've always believed that if you're going to ask audiences to feel something, you should be willing to feel it yourself." A polite answer. Safe. Joy leaned forward. Yes, but don't you think there's a difference between commitment and ego? There it was. The first edge. The first test. Tom's eyes flickered, barely perceptible, but he caught it. He leaned back slightly in his chair, fingers interlacing. Is that a question about filmmaking, he asked evenly, or about me personally? A subtle shift moved through the studio. Not loud. Not explosive. But noticeable. Joy's smile stiffened. Oh, don't be sensitive, she laughed lightly. We're just having fun. Tom's voice remained steady. Of course. I just like clarity. The audience quieted. In the corner, Whoopi Goldberg shifted slightly in her seat, sensing the temperature drop by a single degree. Joy flipped a card casually. Well, clarity is good, she said. Speaking of clarity, do you ever look back at certain public moments and think maybe you overdid it? The reference hung unspoken in the air. Everyone knew what she meant. Tom's jaw tightened almost invisibly. He exhaled through his nose, controlled. You mean when I was happy? He asked. A beat. Joy blinked. When I expressed excitement about my life, he continued, voice still level. No. I don't regret being genuine. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Joy crossed her legs deliberately. Some people might call it theatrical. Tom tilted his head. Some people build careers commenting from a safe distance, he replied softly. Others live publicly and take the hits. A murmur passed through the crowd. Joy's posture stiffened. Oh, are you implying I don't take hits? She shot back. Tom's eyes locked onto hers now. Direct. Unblinking. I'm implying, he said evenly, that there's a difference between asking questions and throwing stones. The words landed. Not shouted. Not dramatic. But precise. The studio air felt heavier. Somewhere in the audience, a cough echoed too loudly. Joy's fingers tightened around her cue card. Are you accusing me of something? She asked, her sweetness thinning. Tom didn't raise his voice. He didn't shift uncomfortably. He didn't smile. I'm saying, he answered, that if we're going to have a conversation, let's have one. Not a performance. That did it. The applause sign remained dark, but energy pulsed through the room like static before lightning. Whoopi glanced sideways. One of the co-hosts lowered her gaze. Joy leaned forward, chin lifted. This is my job, she said firmly. To ask tough questions. Tom nodded once. And it's mine to answer them honestly, he replied. But if we're talking about toughness, real toughness is standing behind what you say when someone pushes back. Silence. Pure silence. Joy's smile disappeared. Her eyes narrowed. The temperature had officially changed. And somewhere deep in the control room, a producer whispered into a headset, stay on this camera. Don't cut. Because something was happening. Something unscripted. Uncomfortable. Uncontainable. Joy inhaled slowly. Well then, she said carefully, let's talk about what people really want to know. Tom didn't blink. The audience leaned in. And just before she delivered the question that would ignite everything, the screen faded to commercial. And in living rooms across America, viewers sat frozen, remote controls forgotten in their hands, sensing that when the cameras returned, this wouldn't be an interview anymore. It would be war. Part 2, the detonation. When the cameras came back from commercial, something had changed. Not visibly. The set still glowed under the golden wash of studio lights. The skyline backdrop of New York shimmered in artificial sunrise hues. The audience still sat in neat rows, hands folded in laps, smiles ready. But the warmth was gone. In its place lingered something tight. Electric. Like the charged stillness before a summer storm breaks open over Manhattan. The red light blinked on. They were live again. Joy didn't smile this time. Her cue cards rested untouched on the table in front of her. She wasn't reading now. She wasn't following structure. She was improvising. And improvisation, when driven by ego instead of instinct, can be dangerous. So, she said slowly, her voice no longer dipped in sweetness but edged with steel, let's stop dancing around it. The audience shifted. Tom sat exactly as before, back straight, hands loosely clasped, shoulders relaxed. But the softness had drained from his expression. His eyes were sharp now. Alert. Joy leaned in. There are people, she continued, who say your public persona is carefully constructed. That you're less authentic than you pretend to be. That what we're seeing right now is just performance. The word hung in the air like smoke. Performance. Tom's gaze didn't move from hers. He took a slow breath. Well, he replied evenly, we're on television. A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the audience. But here's the difference, he continued. A performance is something you hide behind. Authenticity is something you stand on. I'm not hiding. Joy's lips pressed thin. Oh. Because a lot of people would argue otherwise. Which people? Tom asked calmly. She blinked. Sources. He tilted his head slightly. Anonymous ones. A small murmur moved through the crowd. Joy's shoulders stiffened. That's how journalism works. Tom leaned back in his chair, crossing one ankle over his knee. Not defensive. Measured. No, he said softly. That's how gossip works. The word hit harder than any raised voice could have. In the corner, Whoopi Goldberg shifted uncomfortably, fingers tapping lightly against the table. Her eyes darted between them like a spectator at a tennis match that had suddenly become personal. Joy's chin lifted. Are you calling me a gossip? Tom didn't hesitate. I'm saying that if you make accusations without evidence, you're not informing people. You're entertaining them. The audience was silent now. No laughter. No applause. Just attention. Pure, locked attention. Joy's fingers curled around the edge of the table. For decades, she said sharply, I've asked hard questions. People don't come on this show expecting a fan club. They come expecting scrutiny. And scrutiny is fair, Tom replied evenly. But there's a difference between scrutiny and hostility. Her voice rose slightly. Hostility? Because I don't flatter you. Because you assume guilt before answers, he countered. A pause. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though the studio had lost oxygen. One of the co-hosts shifted in her seat, glancing toward the control room. No one intervened. Joy's eyes flashed. You know what I think, she said suddenly. Tom didn't interrupt. I think you're uncomfortable because someone isn't worshipping you. Because someone's finally pushing back against the Hollywood myth. Tom's jaw flexed once, subtly. I don't need worship, he said quietly. I need fairness. Fairness? She repeated, incredulous. You're one of the most powerful men in entertainment. And you're one of the most powerful voices in daytime television, he replied. The audience inhaled almost collectively. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it. Tom leaned slightly forward now, not aggressively, but with intention. You speak to millions every morning, he continued. You shape narratives. You influence perception. That's power. Her voice dropped, low and defensive. I use that power responsibly. Do you? He asked calmly. Silence. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just devastating. A woman in the second row shifted uncomfortably, crossing her arms. Joy's cheeks flushed beneath studio makeup. You're implying I abuse my platform. I'm implying, Tom said slowly, that sometimes it's easier to criticize than to create. Easier to dismantle than to build. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Joy laughed, but it was brittle. Oh please. I've built a career. Yes, Tom nodded. On confrontation. And you haven't, she shot back. You build entire franchises on conflict. The audience murmured again, she thought she had him. Tom smiled faintly. My conflicts are fictional, he said. Yours affect real people. That did it. The temperature snapped. Joy's chair scraped slightly as she shifted forward. You sanctimonious, she caught herself, exhaling sharply. You think you're morally superior? I think, he replied evenly, that accountability shouldn't disappear when the camera turns on. Her hands were trembling now, barely noticeable, but visible to those close enough. Are you accusing me of bullying? She demanded. Tom held her gaze. If someone leaves your show feeling ambushed instead of understood, maybe it's worth asking why. A sharp intake of breath from the audience. Whoopi leaned toward her microphone. Maybe we should pivot. No, Joy snapped, not taking her eyes off Tom. He wants this conversation. Tom didn't blink. I didn't come here for a fight, he said quietly. But I won't pretend when I feel disrespected. Joy's voice cracked slightly. Disrespected? You're the one lecturing me on my own show. Tom's tone never rose. I'm responding to how you chose to open this interview. That landed harder than anything before. Because it was simple. Direct. Unavoidable. Joy's composure fractured. You think you can walk in here and dismantle me? She hissed. Tom shook his head slowly. I'm not dismantling you, he said. I'm holding up a mirror. A gasp. The words echoed in the studio like something dropped on marble. Joy stood abruptly. Her chair legs screeched against the floor. The audience flinched. I will not be psychoanalyzed on live television, she snapped. Tom remained seated. Calm. Still. That's exactly my point, he said gently. You're comfortable analyzing everyone else. Her breathing was heavier now. Faster. You don't know anything about me. You're right, he replied. I only know what you present to the world. A beat. And what you present, he continued softly, often feels like contempt. The audience shifted again. Some nodded subtly. Others stared, wide-eyed. Joy looked around for support. For interruption. For rescue. But the other hosts remained silent, caught between loyalty and truth. Her voice rose into a sharper pitch. You don't get to judge me. I'm not judging, Tom answered. I'm reacting. She slammed her palm against the table. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the studio. Enough. The word trembled with fury. Tom leaned back slightly, folding his hands again. You're spiraling, he said quietly. That was the match to gasoline. I am not spiraling, she shouted. The audience recoiled. A camera operator instinctively adjusted framing to capture both faces in tight shot. Tom's voice was barely above a calm conversation tone. Then breathe, he said. The room froze. Joy stared at him, eyes wide, chest rising and falling sharply. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, doubt flickered in her expression. Not anger. Not pride. Doubt. The control room was silent. Producers exchanged glances but didn't cut away. This was beyond television now. This was exposure. Joy's voice dropped to a low, shaking whisper. You think you've won? Tom's eyes softened slightly. This isn't about winning. Then what is it about? She demanded. He paused. Long enough for the silence to stretch. Long enough for millions watching at home to lean closer to their screens. It's about respect, he said finally. Joy swallowed hard. Her eyes darted toward the audience. And that's when it happened. A single voice from the back row, barely audible but clear enough, called out, "He's right." The studio air fractured. Joy's head snapped toward the crowd. Who said that? She demanded. But the damage was done. The shift had happened. Energy had turned. Not loudly. Not unanimously. But unmistakably. And as Joy stood there, caught between fury and disbelief, the realization crept across her face: this wasn't her stage anymore. It was a reckoning. And she was losing control. Her microphone trembled slightly in her grip. She looked back at Tom. And in that look was something new. Not dominance. Not sarcasm. Fear. Because for the first time in decades on daytime television, someone wasn't backing down. And worse. The audience wasn't either. Part 3, the collapse. What happens when the most powerful voice in the room realizes, the room is no longer on her side? The studio lights still burned hot, flooding the set of The View in their artificial sunrise glow. But now the brightness felt harsh. Exposing. Unforgiving. The polished desk, the skyline backdrop, the polished mugs with neatly printed logos, none of it felt warm anymore. It felt like a stage stripped bare. Joy stood frozen beside her chair, chest rising and falling, microphone clutched tightly in her hand. The single audience comment, "He's right," still echoed in her ears like a crack through glass. Across from her, Tom Cruise remained seated. Calm. Composed. Not triumphant. Just steady. And somehow that steadiness was louder than any shout. For a split second, time seemed to slow. Cameras hovered inches from their faces. Producers whispered frantically in the control room, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the moment unfold. The co-hosts sat stiffly in their chairs, hands folded, eyes darting between the two like witnesses to something irreversible. Joy turned back toward Tom, her voice no longer booming, no longer theatrical. "You think you've exposed me," she said quietly. Tom shook his head once. "I think," he replied gently, "you're not used to being challenged." The words didn't land like an attack. They landed like truth. And truth, when it hits ego, doesn't explode. It erodes. Joy's shoulders tightened. "For 30 years, she said, voice trembling but trying to steady itself, "I've spoken truth to power." Tom didn't raise his voice. "You are power." That sentence hung in the air. Heavy. Unavoidable. "You speak to millions every morning," he continued. "You influence conversations across the country. That's not rebellion. That's authority." Her lips parted, but no words came. In the corner, Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward slightly, her usually confident expression replaced by something far more complicated, concern mixed with realization. Joy's eyes searched the room. For reassurance. For validation. For someone to interrupt. No one did. Her voice sharpened again, but the edge felt thinner now. "So now I'm the villain." Tom exhaled slowly. "No," he said. "You're human." That disarmed her more than anything else. Human. Not tyrant. Not monster. Human. Humans make mistakes, he continued. Humans let ego get in the way. Humans sometimes confuse volume with authority. Her jaw tightened. "And you're above that?" she snapped. Tom's eyes softened. "No," he said. "But when I'm wrong, I try to own it." Silence. Not hostile. Not loud. Just quiet enough to feel uncomfortable. Joy looked down at the table. At her cue cards. At her reflection in the polished surface beneath the studio lights. For years, she had thrived in these moments, sharp, witty, dominant. The one asking the questions. The one pressing, poking, provoking. Now she was the one under the lens. And it felt unbearable. "You came here to humiliate me," she whispered. Tom's expression shifted, genuine confusion flickering across his face. "No," he said softly. "I came here to talk about a film." A faint, nervous chuckle rippled through the audience. But it wasn't mockery. It was release. Joy's grip on the microphone tightened until her knuckles whitened. "You think I enjoy tearing people down?" she asked, almost pleading now. Tom paused. And for the first time since the confrontation began, his voice carried something new. Not defiance. Not challenge. Compassion. "I think," he said carefully, "that sometimes when someone builds their identity around being the sharpest voice in the room, they forget what it feels like to be on the receiving end." The studio air shifted again. Not electric this time. Somber. Joy blinked rapidly. "You don't know what I've endured in this business," she said, voice cracking. "You're right." Tom answered. "I don't." He leaned forward slightly. "But I know what it feels like to be mocked. To be reduced to headlines. To be treated like a caricature instead of a person. A beat. And it doesn't feel good." Joy's breathing slowed. Her anger began to drain, replaced by something far more vulnerable. The co-host sat motionless. The audience watched without blinking. "You think I'm cruel," she murmured. Tom shook his head. "I think you're capable of better." And that was it. That was the line that cracked whatever armor she had left. For a moment, her face softened. The tension around her eyes loosened. The defiance faded. And in its place, reflection. But ego is a stubborn thing. It doesn't surrender quietly. It lashes out one last time. Her expression hardened again. "You sanctimonious little actor," she hissed, though the fire behind it was flickering. "You come in here with your perfect posture and calm voice and pretend you're morally superior." Tom didn't flinch. "I'm not superior," he said. "I'm just not afraid to defend myself." She looked around the room once more. At the audience. At the cameras. At her colleagues. And what she saw wasn't hostility. It wasn't cheering. It was expectation. They were waiting. Waiting to see what she would do next. Admit fault. Escalate further. Walk away. Her microphone trembled in her hand. 30 years, she whispered. 30 years building this career. Tom nodded once. "And you can protect it," he said quietly. "Or you can let this moment define it." The word struck deeper than any insult could have. Because they weren't an attack. They were a choice. Joy's chest rose sharply. Then, suddenly, she ripped the microphone from her collar. The sharp metallic snap echoed across the studio. "I'm done," she said flatly. The audience gasped. Whoopi stood abruptly. "Joy, no," she said, shaking her head. "I will not be lectured on my own stage." She stepped back from the table, heels striking sharply against the floor. The cameras followed instinctively. Tom remained seated. Not victorious. Not smug. Just watching. "Joy," he said quietly, "no one's trying to take your stage." She didn't respond. She turned, walking toward the backstage curtain. Halfway there, she paused. For a heartbeat, it looked like she might turn around. Might say something. Might reclaim control with grace. Instead, she muttered something under her breath and disappeared behind the curtain. The studio fell into a silence so complete it felt unnatural. No music. No applause. Just the hum of studio lights and the faint shuffle of someone adjusting a headset. Whoopi slowly sat back down. One of the co-hosts stared at the empty chair. Another exhaled shakily. Tom looked toward the audience. Then toward the hosts. Then back at the empty space Joy had occupied for decades. "Well," he said softly, a faint hint of irony returning, "should we talk about the movie?" The audience erupted, not in mockery, but in stunned release. The tension cracked like ice breaking on a frozen lake. But beneath the laughter lingered something heavier. A sense that they had witnessed more than an argument. They had witnessed a shift. A moment when composure outweighed volume. When calm dismantled chaos. When a mirror was held up, and no one could look away. The cameras slowly pulled back, widening the frame to capture the entire set. One empty chair. 4 stunned hosts. 1 calm actor. And millions of viewers at home realizing they had just watched something that would be replayed, debated, dissected, and remembered. Not because of shouting. But because of stillness. Not because of humiliation. But because of exposure. As the credits began to roll and the red, live, light faded, the morning sunlight outside the studio windows felt different. Sharper. Clearer. And somewhere backstage, a career was being reconsidered. Not destroyed. Not erased. But forever changed. Because sometimes the loudest collapse isn't explosive. It's quiet. It's subtle. It's the moment the room stops clapping, and starts thinking. And that's how one live television interview turned into a reckoning. If you felt the tension in that studio, if you could sense the shift in power, if you believe conversations like this matter more than scripted politeness. Make sure you like this video. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more cinematic deep dives into the most explosive moments in live television. And share this with someone who believes composure is the strongest weapon of all. Because sometimes the calmest voice in the room changes everything.